Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, brothers and sisters, we are living in a world that is constantly changing, but some things remain constant: the truth, the wisdom, and the call of God. And today I stand before you with a message that is not mine but His. A message that is clear, direct, and crucial to our understanding of the days we are living in. The message is this: God's strong message is here, and we must pay attention. The power of God's message is undeniable. It is not a message of uncertainty, but a message of clarity and purpose. It is a message that calls us to align our lives with a divine order, one that transcends time and culture. We are not left in the dark about our destiny. God's message is a beacon that illuminates the path before us. But as we look around, we see a world in turmoil. Division, confusion, and brokenness seem to prevail. The world is searching for answers in all the wrong places, and too many are lost in the pursuit of fleeting desires. We must acknowledge that these signs are not accidental. They are the fruits of ignoring God's call. The state of our world is the result of a spiritual disconnect that we can no longer afford to overlook. The urgency of our time cannot be overstated. Time is not on our side. God is not a distant figure waiting for us to come around when it's convenient. His call is urgent. It is now. We are living in a moment where every decision, every action, every word we speak carries eternal weight. If we do not heed His message today, we may not have the luxury of tomorrow. The window of opportunity is closing. And so I ask you, what are you doing with the responsibility that has been given to you? Each of us has a part to play in this divine plan. We are not bystanders. We are active participants in the shaping of our world. Our response to God's message is not just an individual matter. It affects families, communities, and nations. Each of us is called to respond with faith and obedience. And obedience is not passive. It is not about just hearing the word. It is about doing the word. True faith leads to action. When we believe in God, we must also trust His guidance and live according to His will. This is where transformation begins. Transformation in our hearts. Transformation in our communities. Transformation in our world. God's message is not meant to leave us the same. It is meant to change us, to restore us, to redeem us. But we must align ourselves with that message and take the necessary steps of faith. Let us not ignore the reality of what is ahead. The signs are all around us, telling us that the end times are near. We are living in a season where the final chapters of history are unfolding. We may not know the day or the hour, but we can see the signs. The end is near, and we must prepare. Now is the time to turn our hearts fully toward God, to repent, to seek His guidance, and to embrace His redemption before it is too late. Brothers and sisters, this is not just a warning, it is an invitation. An invitation to align our lives with the divine purpose that God has for each of us. The end may be near, but the good news is that we can still respond. We can still change the course of our lives. We can still turn to God and receive His grace. But the time to act is now. Let us not delay. Let us take hold of this moment, this message, and the destiny that God has laid before us. And as we do, may we move forward in faith, in obedience, and in the knowledge that God's plan for us is good and His promise is sure. The power of God's message is beyond comprehension, for it is not a message confined to time or space, but one that transcends the limitations of our human understanding. It is a message that speaks directly to the soul, to the heart of every person. and challenges the very essence of who we are. It carries with it an eternal truth, one that remains unchanged no matter the circumstances, the age, or the shifting tides of culture. This message is not a suggestion, it is a command. It is not merely a philosophical idea or a theory to be pondered. It is a living, active call to action, a call that demands our attention and requires our response. God's message is meant to shape the very fabric of our lives. It is not something that can be accepted half-heartedly or superficially. The power of this message lies in its ability to transform us from the inside out, to mold our hearts, to renew our minds, and to guide our steps along the path of righteousness. When we truly encounter God's message, it has the power to reorient our lives, to refocus our priorities, and to realign our desires with His will. It is a force that dismantles falsehoods and brings clarity where there was confusion. It clears the fog of uncertainty and illuminates the path forward with a light that cannot be extinguished. There is authority in God's message, not because of who we are, but because of who He is. The message carries the weight of divine authority, the authority of the Creator who formed the heavens and the earth, the authority of the one who knows the end from the beginning. This is not a message from one who is powerless or distant, but from a God who is intimately involved in every detail of our lives, who cares deeply about our well-being and our eternal future. The message calls us to a higher purpose, to something greater than ourselves, and invites us into a destiny that is far beyond the mundane, far beyond the fleeting pursuits of this world. God's message is a message of hope, but it is also a message of warning. It is not just an invitation to peace and rest, it is a call to responsibility. We cannot hear God's message and remain unchanged. We cannot encounter His truth and walk away unaffected. His message demands a response. It compels us to examine our hearts, to evaluate our choices, and to consider the trajectory of our lives. It challenges us to move from passivity to action, from complacency to purpose, from selfishness to selflessness. The power of God's message is not just in the words He speaks, but in the potential for transformation that those words bring. Every time God speaks, He brings forth life. He brings forth restoration. He brings forth opportunity. But these opportunities are not always easy. They require faith, and they require sacrifice, and they require obedience. The message is not about being comfortable, it is about being transformed. It is not about staying where we are. It is about moving forward, step by step, toward the fullness of what God has called us to be. This is the power of God's message. It is alive, it is active, and it is calling each of us to live according to its truth. The message is here, it is now. And it is more powerful than we can fully grasp. But as we open our hearts to it, as we embrace its call, we will find ourselves changed in ways we never thought possible. And in that transformation, we will begin to see the world around us differently, we will begin to see ourselves differently, and we will begin to live in alignment with the divine purpose that God has set before us. This is the power of God's message. A message that changes everything. It changes how we view the world, how we view ourselves, and how we relate to others. And as we respond to it, we will find not only hope, but a new sense of purpose and direction. God's message is not just words. It is the key to unlocking our potential, the foundation for a life that is truly alive in Him. And that is a power we can never underestimate. As we look around at the world today, it becomes increasingly evident that we are facing a time of immense turmoil and uncertainty. The world seems to be caught in a cycle of confusion, brokenness, and division. In every corner of the globe, there are visible signs of struggle and strife, whether it is in the form of political unrest, economic instability, social injustice, or environment. These issues are not isolated to one region or nation, but span across continents, affecting people from all walks of life. The fabric of society seems to be unraveling in ways that are deeply concerning. There is a sense of disillusionment among many as people search for meaning, purpose, and direction in a world that seems increasingly chaotic. Many are overwhelmed by the weight of their circumstances, battling mental and emotional health crises, and seeking solace in temporary fixes that offer little lasting peace. Here, the pursuit of success and material wealth has become the driving force for many. But even in the pursuit of these things, there remains a deep void within the hearts of people, a void that no amount of wealth or achievement can fill. At the same time, we see a growing disconnect between individuals, families, and communities. The bonds that once held societies together, shared values, trust, and common purpose, are being replaced with isolation, mistrust, and division. People are increasingly divided along lines of race, religion, ideology, and nationality, and the resulting fragmentation only deepens the sense of alienation and loneliness felt by so many. It seems as though people are drifting further apart, unable or unwilling to find common ground or engage in meaningful dialogue. This fragmentation is not limited to human relationships. It is also evident in our relationship with the environment. The earth, which was created to be a place of harmony and balance, is now groaning under the weight of pollution, climate change, and the depletion of natural resources. The very ecosystems that sustain life are being degraded at an alarming rate, and the consequences of this are beginning to be felt more profoundly than ever before. It is a sobering reminder of how disconnected we have become from the natural world and the stewardship we were entrusted with. Amid all this turmoil, there is also a growing sense of spiritual hunger. People are searching for meaning, for something greater than themselves to hold on to. Yet the answers they seek seem elusive. Traditional sources of wisdom, truth, and guidance are often overlooked or dismissed, and many turn to fleeting distractions that ultimately fail to satisfy the deeper yearnings of the soul. The noise of modern life, the distractions of technology, entertainment, and instant gratification only add to the sense of emptiness as people become more focused on the superficial rather than the eternal. This condition of the world is not merely a reflection of external circumstances, but a symptom of a deeper spiritual crisis. We are witnessing the consequences of a world that has largely turned away from its Creator, a world that has chosen to pursue its own path instead of aligning with the divine order. It is a world that has lost its sense of purpose, its moral compass, and its connection to the higher principles that govern life. As a result, the world is reeling from the weight of its own choices, facing the consequences of decisions made in ignorance or defiance of the divine will. The brokenness we see in the world is not just a random occurrence. It is the result of a spiritual void, that needs to be filled. It is the outcome of a collective turning away from truth and righteousness. But this condition is not beyond redemption. The world in its brokenness still carries the potential for restoration. While the present condition may seem overwhelming, it is not a permanent state. There is still hope. There is still the possibility for transformation, and there is still the opportunity to turn toward the truth that can heal and restore. Yet, for this restoration to occur, there must first be a recognition of the root causes of the current condition. The world must acknowledge the spiritual bankruptcy that has led to its current state. It must recognize the need for a return to the values that sustain true life. Values of love, compassion, justice, and truth. Only then can we begin to address the deeper issues that lie beneath the surface and embark on a path of healing and reconciliation. In order to bring about lasting change, we must first look inward and address the condition of our own hearts. The state world is a reflection of the state of humanity itself. We must seek to heal not only the world around us, the world within us. Only when we return to the principles of truth, justice, and love, principles that are rooted in the divine will, can we begin to address the brokenness and division that plague our societies. Only then can we begin to restore balance, harmony, and peace, both within ourselves and in the world at large. The urgency of our time is something that cannot be ignored or underestimated. We are living in an era where the events of today are unfolding at a pace that seems unprecedented, where the decisions we make have the potential to shape not only our lives, but the future of generations to come. There is a palpable sense of immediacy, a knowing that the window of opportunity for change and redemption is rapidly closing. The choices we make today are not just about us in the moment. They echo through time, impacting those who will come after us. And yet, far too many remain indifferent to the times we are living in, unaware of the significance of the present hour. It is easy to become numb to the urgency of the world around us, especially when we are caught up in the hustle and bustle of daily life. The distractions are endless, and the noise of modern living often drowns out the deeper call of the soul. But we cannot afford to remain passive, to allow the urgency of this time to pass us by unnoticed. Our world is facing crises on multiple fronts: moral decay, environmental degradation, political instability, and a spiritual vacuum that leaves many searching for meaning but coming up empty. Each day, we are confronted with signs that point toward the need for change, for turning back to truth, to righteousness, and to purpose. Yet there is a sense of complacency that too often prevents action. The truth is, time is slipping away faster than we realize. The world in its current state cannot continue on its present trajectory without severe consequences. We are on the precipice of something significant, a tipping point where the choices made by individuals, communities, and nations will determine the course of our future. The moral compass of society is no longer guided by universally accepted truths, but by shifting opinions and self-serving agendas. This has led to confusion, division, and chaos. And as we look around, it becomes increasingly clear that if there is to be any hope for a better future, it is up to us to make the change happen and to make it now. This urgency is not something we can simply talk about or reflect upon idly. It is something that demands action, something that calls for us to step outside our comfort zones and confront the realities of our times. We can no longer afford to wait for the right moment or the perfect circumstances. There will never be a time when the world is ready for change in the way we imagine. The time to act is now, not tomorrow, not next year, but today. The longer we delay, the harder it becomes to reverse the damage that has been done. The harder it becomes to restore what has been lost. The longer we put off addressing the moral, spiritual, and societal crises of our time, the more entrenched they become. The urgency is not just external, it is internal as well. Each of us, as individuals, must recognize the urgency within our own hearts. It is easy to look at the world and see all the problems that need to be solved. But true change begins within us. We must ask ourselves, are we living in alignment with the values that matter most? Are we actively pursuing the higher calling that God has placed on our lives? Are we contributing to the healing and restoration of the world, or are we passive observers, hoping someone else will take the lead? The urgency of our time calls for a radical shift in our priorities. It calls for us to re-examine how we live, what we value, and what we stand for. It challenges us to take responsibility for the world around us and for the legacy we will leave behind. The time to act is not tomorrow, not in some distant future. It is today, this very moment. We must choose consciously and decisively to make a difference now, in the present, for there is no guarantee that we will have the luxury of more time. We must also understand that the urgency of our time is not something to fear, but something to embrace. It is an invitation to rise up, to take hold of the moment, and to live in alignment with the divine purpose that has been set before us. God has given us everything we need to respond to this moment, to address the needs of our world, and to bring about the transformation that is so desperately needed. But we must choose to step forward with faith, courage, and conviction. In this time of urgency, let us not be content with mediocrity, nor let us be paralyzed by fear or uncertainty. The world needs those who are willing to stand firm in the truth, who are ready to take bold steps toward justice, compassion, and peace. The time is now. And if we are to make a lasting impact, we must act with the understanding that the choices we make today will shape the tomorrow that is yet to come. The responsibility of the people is a weighty and undeniable truth that we must all come to terms with. It is not just a vague notion or an abstract idea, but a calling that impacts every aspect of our lives. Each individual, regardless of their position in life, is entrusted with the responsibility to respond to the world's needs, to align with a higher purpose, and to actively contribute to the shaping of the future. In this time, it is easy to pass responsibility to others, to assume that someone else will take care of the issues we face. But the reality is that the responsibility lies with each one of us. No one is exempt. We cannot afford to adopt a passive approach to the world's suffering or its crises. We must accept our role as active participants in the healing, restoration, and transformation of society. We are not isolated beings disconnected from one another. We live in a shared world where our actions, or lack thereof, influence the lives of those around us. The choices we make, the way we treat others, the way we use our resources, the way we live out our values, all have an impact on the broader community. The responsibility we have is not only personal, but collective. We are interconnected, and when one suffers, we all suffer. When one is uplifted, we all rise together. Our responsibility is not just to our own well-being, but to the well-being of the whole of humanity. We must recognize that we cannot thrive in a world that is broken if we do not actively seek to mend it. We cannot remain indifferent to injustice suffering, or inequality. The responsibility to address these issues belongs to each of us, and it is our duty to step forward and take action. This responsibility also requires us to take a long-term view of the impact of our choices. Too often we are caught up in the immediate, in the now, and in the desire for instant gratification. But this short-sightedness only leads to temporary solutions which do not address the root causes of our problems. As individuals and communities, we must adopt a perspective that looks beyond our own immediate needs and desires and considers the long-term consequences of our actions. Our responsibility is not just to ourselves or even to our generation. It extends to the future generations who will inherit the world we leave behind. Will we leave behind a legacy of wisdom, kindness, and justice? Or will we pass on a world riddled with division, greed, and environmental devastation? The responsibility of the people calls for us to embrace unity over division. It is far too easy to get caught up in the differences that separate us. Differences of race, religion, nationality, and ideology. These differences often become the very thing that keeps us from coming together for a common cause. But if we are to fulfill our responsibility to each other and to the world, we must rise above these barriers and find common ground. Our shared humanity must be the basis for the unity we need to overcome the challenges we face. Division only weakens us and hinders our collective ability to bring about positive change. In times of crisis, the strength of a community lies in its ability to come together, to work toward a common goal, and to support one another even when there are differences in perspective or background. The responsibility of the people is also one of accountability. We are called to hold ourselves and each other accountable for the actions we take and the choices we make. This is not a responsibility that can be taken lightly or passed off to others. We cannot expect change to happen unless we are willing to hold ourselves to a higher standard, to be honest about our shortcomings, and to make the necessary changes in our own lives. Each person must ask themselves, what am I doing to contribute to the solution? How am I taking responsibility for the condition of the world around me? It is easy to point fingers and place blame on others, but true change begins when we look inward and take ownership of our part in the process. There is also a moral dimension to our responsibility. It is not enough to simply do what is convenient or self-serving. We must act in accordance with the values of justice, compassion, and truth. Our actions must be guided by a sense of right and wrong, by the understanding that we are called to live in a way that upholds the dignity of every person and honors the sanctity of life. This moral responsibility calls us to challenge systems of injustice, to stand up for those who are oppressed, and to ensure that the least among us are treated with the same respect and care as the most privileged. The world's problems are not going to be solved by half-hearted efforts or by following the path of least resistance. True responsibility demands courage. The courage to stand for what is right, even when it is difficult or unpopular. Finally, the responsibility of the people requires a willingness to sacrifice. Change does not come without cost. The road to transformation is often paved with sacrifice, whether that means giving up personal comfort for the sake of others, enduring hardship in pursuit of a greater good, or standing firm in the face of opposition. The easy path is not the one that leads to lasting change. It is a path of selflessness, of commitment to something greater than our own desires. This is the path we are called to walk, and it requires each of us to be willing to give of ourselves, to lay down our own agendas for the sake of a higher purpose. In accepting the responsibility of the people, we step into our divine calling to be agents of change, to be voices of truth, and to be instruments of peace. The world is waiting for us to fulfill our role. It is a weighty responsibility, but it is one that we can carry if we do so together with unity, accountability, and a commitment to justice. The future depends on our willingness to take responsibility today. The rule of faith and obedience is foundational to the life of every believer and essential to the fulfillment of God's purpose for our lives. Faith is the bedrock upon which everything stands, and obedience is the evidence of that faith in action. In a world that often emphasizes personal autonomy and self-sufficiency, the concept of submitting to something greater than ourselves can seem countercultural. But it is precisely in surrendering to God and trusting in His guidance that we find the fulfillment, peace, and direction we seek. Faith is not merely a belief in the existence of God or an acknowledgement of His power. It is a deep personal trust in His character, in His wisdom, and in His plan for our lives. True faith goes beyond mere intellectual assent. It is a heart-level confidence in God's promises and His ability to fulfill them. It is a faith that knows without question that God's ways are higher than our own and that His plan is always good, even when we cannot fully understand it. This kind of faith enables us to move forward, even in the face of uncertainty, to take steps when the path is unclear, and to persevere through challenges, because we trust that God is with us and will guide us through every circumstance. Faith without obedience is incomplete. Obedience is the natural outgrowth of true faith. If we believe in God and trust in His word, we will respond by doing what He commands. Obedience is not about blind compliance or following rules for the sake of following rules. It is about aligning our hearts and actions with God's will, trusting that His way is the best way, and walking in the direction He has set before us. When we obey, we acknowledge that God's wisdom surpasses our own, and that His directives are for our ultimate good. Through obedience, we honor God and demonstrate that we are willing to place our trust in Him, not just in our words, but in the choices we make and the actions we take. The connection between faith and obedience is profound. Faith without obedience is like a seed that is never planted. It holds great potential, but it never grows. Likewise, obedience without faith is hollow, for it becomes mere duty rather than a response to divine love. True obedience is born from faith, and true faith expresses itself in obedience. It is not enough to simply believe in God. We are called to live out that belief by following His commands, by loving our neighbors, by seeking justice, and by walking humbly before Him. When we walk in obedience, we are fulfilling the very purpose for which we were created, to reflect the character of God and to advance His kingdom on earth. The role of faith and obedience is not only about individual transformation, it extends to the broader community as well. As we live in faith and obedience, we become examples to those around us. Our faith inspires others to trust in God, and our obedience encourages them to follow in the same footsteps. In a world that is often characterized by doubt and disobedience, living a life of faith and obedience stands as a testimony to the power of God to change lives. It demonstrates that His way is not burdensome, but is in fact the path to true freedom, peace, and fulfillment. There is also a transformative power in obedience. When we choose to obey, even when it is difficult or when we don't fully understand, God works in us, shaping our character and deepening our trust in Him, Obedience refines us, breaking down the barriers of selfishness and pride and producing in us the fruit of the Spirit. It teaches us humility, patience, and perseverance. Obeying God's word brings us into alignment with his divine purposes. And as we walk in obedience, we become more like Christ, reflecting his love, his mercy, and his grace in everything we do. Faith and obedience also lead us into a deeper intimacy with God. As we trust him and obey his commands, we grow in our relationship with him. Obedience is not a matter of duty alone. It is an expression of our love for God. Jesus himself said, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments." Obeying God is an act of love, a way of saying, "I trust you. I believe in your goodness. And I know that your way is the best way." This obedience draws us closer to God, enabling us to experience his presence in new and profound ways. It opens a door to his guidance and wisdom. And as we follow his leading, we discover the depths of his purpose for our lives. The role of faith and obedience is not without its challenges. It is often easier to rely on our own understanding, to trust in our own abilities, or to follow our own desires. But God calls us to something higher, to trust him with everything, to surrender our will, and to walk in the way that he has set before us. Obedience may require sacrifice, and it may not always make sense in the moment, but it is always worth it. The blessings that come from walking in faith and obedience are not always material or immediate, but they are eternal. The peace, the joy, and the fulfillment that flow from living in harmony with God's will are immeasurable. In the face of life's trials, the role of faith and obedience becomes even more critical. When we face difficulties, we are often tempted to question God's goodness or to doubt his plan. But it is precisely in those moments that our faith must be most active, trusting that God is working all things together for good, even when we can't see the full picture. And it is in those moments that our obedience becomes an act of worship, a declaration that we trust God, not just in the good times, but in the challenging times as well. Ultimately, the role of faith and obedience is to lead us into a life that reflects God's glory, a life that is marked by love, peace, and purpose. As we trust in him and follow his guidance, we fulfill the calling that God has placed on our lives, and we become instruments of his kingdom on earth. In faith and obedience, we find our true purpose and we experience the abundant life that he has promised to those who trust him with all their hearts. The end times are near, and as we witness the unfolding of global events, there is an undeniable sense of urgency and awareness that we are on the brink of something momentous. The signs are all around us. In the increasing moral decline, the rise of chaos and conflict, the environmental crises, and the growing distance between humanity and its creator. These signs are not random or coincidental. They are part of a divine blueprint that has been foretold throughout history. Whether through scripture, prophetic words, or the deeper stirrings of the human heart, there is a call to awaken, to recognize the gravity of the times, and to prepare ourselves for what lies ahead. The reality of the end times is not something to be feared, but rather something to be understood and embraced with a heart of readiness. Many in the world are oblivious to the significance of this moment in history, caught up in the pursuit of fleeting pleasures, distractions, and self-interest. Yet for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear, the signs of the times are clear. Wars, famines, and natural disasters are escalating. And the fabric of society is rapidly deteriorating. The moral compass that once held societies together is now fractured, and people are seeking their own paths of truth, leading to confusion and disillusionment. This is the reality of the world we live in, and it is a world on the cusp of transformation. It is easy to dismiss the idea of the end times, to convince ourselves that life will continue as it always has, and that things will eventually get better on their own. But the truth is that the world as we know it cannot continue down this path indefinitely. The natural order is being pushed to its limits, and humanity's rebellion against divine principles has reached a critical point. Scripture speaks of a time when the world will be shaken, when the powers of the heavens will be disrupted, and when people will be caught off guard by the sudden and overwhelming change. The end times are not a vague or distant concept, but a reality that is approaching swiftly. As we look at the state of the world, it is clear that the trajectory we are on is unsustainable. The disregard for life, the pervasive evil, the rampant injustice, and the widespread apathy towards the divine call are all indicators that the world is heading toward a time of reckoning. There will be a day when every wrong will be made right, every injustice will be addressed, and every heart will be held accountable. It is a sobering reality, but it is one that we must face. For the end times are not merely a theoretical concept, but an inevitable part of God's unfolding plan for humanity. For those who are spiritually awake, the approaching end times are a call to action. It is not a time for complacency or fear, but a time to respond with urgency and faithfulness. The call is to prepare our hearts to be vigilant and to live in such a way that we are ready for the return of the Lord. The end times are not about a specific date or event, but about a season in which the culmination of God's will and the fulfillment of his promises are drawing near. We must not wait for some dramatic event to wake us up. The time to act is now. This is the moment to strengthen our faith, to deepen our relationship with God, and to live out the principles of justice, mercy, and love that he has commanded. In this time of urgency, there is a choice before us: to live as though the world will go on forever, or to live with an awareness that we are accountable for how we live, how we love, and how we steward the gifts God has given us. The end times are a reminder that the world is temporary and that our time here is short. It is a call to invest in what matters eternally, in our relationship with God, in the well-being of others, and in the advancement of his kingdom. The end times are also a reminder of God's grace. Even as the world hurtles toward a time of judgment, God's invitation for repentance and salvation remains. His love is still extended to all who would turn to him in faith. The end times are not just about judgment, but about the opportunity for redemption, the chance to return to God and receive the forgiveness and peace that only he can provide. In the midst of chaos and uncertainty, God is still calling people to himself, offering them a way out of the coming storm. As believers, we are called not to fear the end times, but to prepare ourselves and to live in a way that reflects the urgency of the hour. We must be faithful in our call to be salt and light in a darkening world, to be witnesses of God's truth and love, and to be agents of reconciliation and peace. The end times are not a reason to shrink back, but to press forward with even greater passion and purpose, knowing that the days are short and that the harvest is ripe. For those who do not know God, the end times are a wake-up call, a moment of grace to turn from the ways of the world and toward the hope that is found in Christ. The end times are not just about signs and wonders, but about an invitation to embrace the fullness of life that is found in him. It is a reminder that God's judgment is not arbitrary, but is based on his perfect justice, and that the only way to escape the coming wrath is through a relationship with him. The time is now to choose life, to choose truth, and to choose the path that leads to eternal peace. In the grand scheme of God's eternal plan, the end times are a pivotal moment, a time when the world will be shaken, but also a time when the faithful will be vindicated and God's promises will be fully realized. It is a moment of great hope and great responsibility. As the end draws near, it is a time to reflect on where we stand, to examine our lives, and to commit to living in alignment with God's will, knowing that he is coming soon and that the time for preparation is now. The end times are near, and the question is, how will we respond?